Welcome to 28storms.com and Hurricane Tracker app. This is a brief update on Hurricane Rina on this Tuesday, October 25th. The latest information from the Hurricane Center indicates that Rina is a 105 mile per hour Category 2 hurricane, but the latest forecast is calling for this system to become a major hurricane within the next 24 hours, and we see that by the latter half of this week, especially into Thursday, that is when the hurricane is expected to make a direct landfall along the eastern half of the Yucatan. So all interests here from San Pedro northward need to be paying close attention to this system. Even San Pedro is under tropical storm warnings because that is the current level of winds that the Hurricane Center is anticipating for that area. But especially points more toward the north, you have a much greater chance of being impacted by hurricane force winds. And of course, as we go into Friday and Saturday, it looks increasingly likely that Rina will be taking a turn more toward the northeast. This is a look at the latest spaghetti model spread, and we still have quite a lot of divergence. There are some models that take the center just to the east of Cozumel and Cancun, but at this point it's starting to look more like the Hurricane Center track forecast, with the center making its way over land, or at least the coastal areas, is going to verify. And then after that, all of the models are starting to come into agreement now that southern Florida or western Cuba will at least be affected into the weekend. The majority of intensity models are taking Rina to Category 3 major hurricane status. We even have one model that tries to attempt to strengthen the system into a Category 4, but a Category 3 max intensity appears to be the most likely outcome. And then as we go into the weekend, we will more than likely see an increase in vertical wind shear over the northwest Caribbean and especially the southeast Gulf of Mexico. So as you can see, a downward trend in the intensity forecast is anticipated. As to how much it does weaken, well, that remains to be seen, but we'll go ahead and dissect this a little bit further as we go on through the video. The hurricane hunters just recently flew through the center of the storm, and they are indicating that the lowest central pressure is down to 970 millibars. So this is a slight 1 millibar decrease from the official 1 p.m. advisory. So the system is more than likely hanging steady, at least at the moment, but if anything, it is still trending towards some intensification. And the forecast of this becoming a major hurricane within the next day looks fairly good. You can see that it's becoming better structured on the satellite from hour to hour, and we have a well-defined eye trying to peek itself out here within the central dense overcast, and we still have quite a lot of abundant convection, which leads me to believe that the dry air surrounding the hurricane is not being allowed to funnel into the inner core of the system. So again, a major hurricane looks fairly likely within the next 24 hours. Here again is the storm on a more regional scale, and typically all of this dry air surrounding the storm would be a concern for the system to survive, but a lot of times as long as the upper level wind environment is favorable, dry air entrainment becomes less of an issue, and we can see that there's a fairly healthy upper level ridge over the northwest Caribbean. We can tell that is the case by this abundant outflow that is now streaking across much of Cuba and into the southwest Bahamas. Now, if we turn to the latest United States water vapor animation, this will give us a good clue as to what may happen as we inch closer to the weekend. We see the trough continuing to dive into the southwest United States, and over the next 48 to 72 hours, this trough will continue to move more toward the southeast into the southern plains and lower Mississippi Valley, and that's going to go ahead and enhance the wind shear over much of the lower Gulf of Mexico, and it's really not going to make for a very conducive environment. So even though the system is going to intensify into a Category 3, it will more than likely weaken to a borderline Category 1 or strong tropical storm as it makes that turn more toward the northeast in the general direction of western Cuba or southern Florida. The latest SIMS wind shear analysis also shows this fairly well. We have the upper level ridge centered across much of the central Caribbean, and the northern extent of it extends all the way into western Cuba, but here we are just to the north where there's quite a lot of dry air and wind shear, and if we look including the North American sector, we see that the other trough is already coming down, and all this wind shear is also going to eventually make it into the Gulf of Mexico. Since Rina is now a powerful hurricane, it is being steered by the mid-layers of the atmosphere, and this is a rundown of how things have transpired over the last 24 hours. We can see that we started off with a ridge over southeast Texas, but notice how it's beginning to extend more toward the east, and it's now centered over Alabama and Georgia. And this ridge is going to continue progressing more toward the east as we have that trough coming down from the southwest United States. If we go ahead and take a closer look at some of the latest 12Z model guidance, starting off with the 12Z GFS, This is the 500 millibar pattern, so the same trough that we saw on the water vapor across the western United States is outlined fairly well here in the model. And of course, here is our hurricane located just to the north of Honduras, and we have mid-level ridging as denoted by the green colors over much of the southeast United States. So as we quickly advance this deeper into the forecast period, notice as we go into about the 72-hour time frame that the trough has already swept across much of the nation and is now draped across much of the southeast United States, and that is the main reason why the GFS is now taking this system more in the general direction of southern Florida. However, as has been alluded to for several times over the last couple of days, as that trough comes down, it's going to continue to enhance the vertical wind shear over the southeast Gulf of Mexico. This is the GFS shear forecast for the same time frame that the storm is expected to be moving through southern Florida, and all these darker colors represents very unfavorable winds, and it is more than likely that this storm will be impacting the lower half of the Sunshine State at no more than a strong tropical storm or borderline minimal Category 1 hurricane at best. And perhaps the most extreme scenario is the 12Z ECMWF model solution. We can quite clearly see the tropical system at the current time frame just to the north of Honduras, but as we go into 24 and 48 hours, it looks like it's about to make a landfall along the eastern half of the Yucatan just to the south of Cozumel, Mexico. However, as we go into Thursday and Friday, the system dissipates altogether as it becomes absorbed by that trough over the Gulf Coast. Before I wrap up this video for this afternoon, it must be emphasized that the main emphasis should be on the eastern half of the Yucatan, especially as we go into the latter half of the week. It's getting to the point where there is a very strong model consensus that the center will be making a landfall here to the north of San Pedro and to the south of Cancun, Mexico, and all points in between need to be bracing for a major hurricane impact in the event that this system does not weaken just before landfall, and it also fails to make that recurvature in time to avoid portions of the Yucatan coast. So continue to make your hurricane preparations if you live along the Yucatan, and all interest in western Cuba and southern Florida should not be overly concerned at this point because it does not look like a major hurricane will be heading your way. But as always, this is the tropics that we are dealing with, so please stay tuned to the latest official products from the Hurricane Center. And regardless, as it stands right now, you still very well could be impacted by a borderline weak Category 1 hurricane or a strong tropical storm, and of course, both of those types of systems can still bring some rather hazardous weather conditions. So stay tuned for more updates.